C-Mix Radio, the home of yesterday's music.
Welcome to the C-Mix Radio magazine, a program of news, sports, space science, and more. Here is your host, Mike Stanley.
Welcome to another edition of the C-Mix magazine. This is episode number 6. And on this week's program, of course, the News Watch is an old one. We're doing some of the rebroadcasts here, and this one, UBC Chances on the News Watch this week, followed by Man in Space. Should be interesting. And we have something about the CFL playoffs 2014, that commentary on that. Speaking of sports, it'll be followed by the musings one about angry people at the welfare office. Should be a very interesting one. And then, of course, we have the Room 6. Should be interesting within that as well. So let's get the show underway with this one. We start with the News Watch, and an old one, but it's about UBC Chants. I wonder if they're still doing this kind of stuff anyway. So, UBC Chants and the News Watch on the C-Mix Radio magazine.
This is the News Watch.
There appears to be a growing problem at UBC these days. The problem is that some students at UBC School of Business are engaging in some pretty offensive behavior, like racist and sexist chanting. These aren't yoga chants, they're chants aimed at certain minority groups, such as Aboriginal students, and some of the chants endorse rape. UBC President Stephen Toop has promised that action will be taken against students involved in this kind of behavior. He says that those responsible will be held accountable, but added, "I think I have to be more direct and say that I can ensure that this will never happen again." The Commerce Undergraduate Society, which collects $1.3 million worth of annual fees from business students, has donated about $250,000 to pay a counselor to educate students about sexual abuse and violence. Toop says that a task force is looking into systemic or organizational issues at UBC, but he believes that the same problems are prevalent at universities across Canada. It seems that every year around this time, we hear stories of healing rituals taking place at schools and especially at universities and colleges. Practice of initiating newer students into the fold is becoming more and more dangerous, and in many cases, violent. What's happening at UBC is nothing short of perverse. New students don't need this kind of initialized introduction into campus life. If they have a special talent, that talent should be nurtured, and the new student should be welcomed into whatever club he or she chooses to be involved in, without some form of ritualistic initiation process. UBC President Stephen Toop will be assembling a task force to investigate these chants which encourage rape as well as racist chants. This kind of behavior should be met with a heavy hand, and those held responsible should be harshly penalized, whether it be in the form of fines, suspensions, or better still, a giant F on their year-end report card. And that's my 2 bits. I'm Mike Stanley.
The News Watch is a C-Mix Media production. Thank you for tuning in.
This is Exploring Space, a feature on space-related topics.
On this edition of Exploring Space, we're going to look at something quite unique, basically about the history of manned spaceflight. And I found this on the NASA TV channel, so courtesy of NASA, a little bit of spaceflight history going back to the early 1960s. And on this video, they'll talk about something called the Mercury spaceflight. But we're going to start with the program in progress, and only pick up about 3 or 4 minutes of the... They talked about the Mercury spaceflight and some of the things that happened, and John Glenn's first trip into orbit, way back in 1962. And so let's give this a listen from NASA TV. Talk about
Although the spacecraft was basically the same, it had been modified for the extended mission. It had an increased electrical power supply, also more man-required consumables such as oxygen and drinking water. In addition, certain system redundancies had been eliminated, thus making the astronaut an even more essential part of the overall spacecraft system. The flight plans for the MA9 mission called for astronaut Cooper's participation in 11 different space experiments. These included specific aeromedical studies of man's reaction to extended orbital flight. Other experiments included weather observations, also space photography of dim light phenomena and horizon definition. Observation was also to be made of a specially devised flashing beacon, which was to be released during orbit. All programmed activities were accomplished. Astronaut Cooper demonstrated man's capability to eat and drink and sleep in a space environment. He also demonstrated much more. During the 19th orbit, a green .05 G light, similar to the one shown, illuminated prematurely, an indication of possible automatic control system failure. The remainder of the flight had to be made by using manual control. Astronaut Cooper was also required to manually fire the retro rockets and control the re-entry. After more than 34 hours in orbit, Faith 7 returned to Earth and was recovered successfully. The spacecraft landed within 8,700 yards of the prime recovery vessel. Project Mercury came to an unofficial end on that day in May 1963. In actual time, the program lasted 4 years, 8 months, and 5 days, during which time 900,000 miles were flown and a total of 54 hours of manned spaceflight time accrued. A nation intimately shared the successes of Project Mercury, and it also shared its failures. The names and faces of the astronauts Shepard, Grissom, Glenn, Carpenter, Schirra, Cooper, and Slayton were well known to the rest of the world. The names of their spacecraft, too, had become household words. To the nation, Project Mercury had a special significance, for it had proved that the closely knit team of industry and government could orient their efforts to the achievement of a common national goal. The ultimate success of Project Mercury, however, can never be fully told, for its story has neither beginning nor end. The program came into being as a continuation of man's effort to meet the space challenge, and is being carried on through more advanced programs such as Gemini and Apollo. These and future programs will share a common heritage to ensure their success. A heritage of science and engineering, design and technology, experience and knowledge. The sum of these is the spaceflight legacy bequeathed to all men by Project Mercury.
We hope you enjoyed that little piece about space history. It's interesting to look back at the old films and see that, hear what happened then. Most younger generation don't even realize that yet. But there you go, a little bit of space history on CMix Radio. And that's Exploring Space for this week. I'm Mike Stanley.
Exploring Space is a CMix Media production.
You are listening to the CMix Radio Magazine, a weekly features program.
I hope you enjoyed the first two segments there about man in space. Covered a bit of history about man in space, travel and stuff like that. And we had the news watch, and kind of a dated one about UBC chants. They were doing something last year about chants at UBC, some rape chants or something like that. Kind of a ritual they do. UBC is kind of funny in that way. I think all universities have the same problem. They have these little things you have to go through to become a real student or something like that. Anyway, we're moving along, and then we got a couple of things. We got the musings ones talking about angry people at the welfare office, angry hydro customers perhaps, or just angry people going to the welfare office to complain about their check. Anyway, that will come up. In the meantime, here's something commentary we did today. something in reaction to yesterday's whitewash of the BC Lions yesterday, getting bombed 50-17. So we have that coming up. So talking to the Great War coming up in Vancouver in about a couple of weeks' time. So that's what's coming up on Speaking of Sports, as part of CMix Radio Magazine.
This is Speaking of Sports, a feature of CMix Radio Sports.
Did you see the game yesterday? I don't think they were even in Montreal at all, or even in Quebec for that matter. Their play was just putrid. I mean, you can't say anything more than that. They threw the ball away, they kicked the ball away, they fumbled over everything, they tripped over their own shoelaces, and they lost the game 50-17. And you know what? They got their asses kicked good, and it looks good on them. That's one of my thinkings. This year's Grey Cup should be interesting. Calgary and Edmonton for the West Final. That should be a tilt, and we should all watch. In the East Final, Hamilton and Montreal. We'll play it out to see who represents the East. I have one other comment that I'd like to make. It's about the crossover. When did it start, this kind of stuff? Ever since the crossover came in, the Western team, they got their butts kicked so bad it wasn't funny. I just don't think we should have a crossover. Just have the top 3 teams in the league in the West, top 3 in the East, and play it out the way they used to do it. That's the way most people remember it. So anyway, the top 2 teams in the West will play for the West title, and the top 2 teams in the East. Toronto didn't make it because of this crossover nonsense. It's Montreal and Hamilton in the East, and I think if I want to make a prediction right now, I would like to say that Hamilton will be Montreal in the East Final. And Calgary will probably kick the heck out of Edmonton for the West Final. And we'll have a Grey Cup game in Vancouver featuring Calgary and Montreal. That should be an interesting one just the same. And by the way, who do you think's going to play the halftime show? I got my picks. How about 5440 or Carly Rae Jepsen? 5440's been around for 30 years plus, and Carly Rae Jepsen from Mission is about 30 years plus years old. That should be a great halftime show. And what about the Police? They'd make a good halftime show. It's okay, the Police will be there anyway just to keep the drunks from getting out of hand. We'll have to wait and see what happens. There's 2 more weeks to go, and we'll find out who's in the Grey Cup. Calgary and Montreal, that's my prediction.
Speaking of Sports is a CMix Media production. Stanley's Musings, a commentary feature of CMix Radio.
The old hydro bill was $55. The new one I just got is more than $200. What's wrong with this picture? I'm getting the feeling that the hydro company is trying to screw the little guy. I went to the welfare office yesterday and saw how crowded it was, and I'm assuming that many of those who were there were angry recipients who were wondering just how they were going to survive when they looked at hydro bills. I volunteer with a local community radio station, but I'm not too interested in political activism. But just getting that huge bill might make me peed off enough to raise my voice just a little louder, because I think the government wants us to scream at them. I think their voices should be shouting loudly at the corporation which is showing no mercy whatsoever at those with unlimited incomes, who can't afford to pay the whopping 300% increase in their hydro bills. I'm one of the little guys, and if that crowded welfare office is any indication, there are a lot of angry hydro customers in need of more than just a little financial help.
Stanley's Musings is a CMix Media production. You are listening to the CMix Radio Magazine, a weekly features program.
Welcome back to the program, and As we know, we're fairly busy all around here and just looking for things to monkey around with. And as we're doing that, we remembered that we had one more segment to go, and we had forgotten one piece of information, and we'll put it in here as well. We're going to have Our City on the Air, chapter number 6, talking about CKNW, part number 2. And we'll follow that by the Creative Room, number 6, coming up. So that's what's coming up here on this segment of the C-Mix Radio Magazine. Here's Our City on the Air, chapter number 6.
Welcome to Our City on the Air, a 10-part program about Vancouver's radio history. This is chapter 6.
This is the final chapter in our 3-part look at Vancouver's top dog. During the 90s, the station moved from a mix of news, live sports, talk shows, and middle-of-the-road music, which had been its mainstay since the 1960s, to full-time news, talk, and sports by the end of the decade. In November of 1993, news veteran Warren Barker, who retired 2 years earlier, was presented with the Bruce Hutchison Lifetime Achievement Award for his outstanding contribution to journalism in British Columbia. On January the 15th of 1996, CKNW moved to the Pacific Center, 700 West Georgia Street. The new facilities included 30,000 square feet of workspace, 5 studios, and 13 control rooms. General Manager Rob Gunn hosted the official grand opening, with the ribbon cutting performed by Emily Griffiths. Her husband, Frank, purchased the station from original owner Bill Ray 40 years earlier. In 1996, Warren Barker again received recognition from his peers when he was inducted into the Canadian Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame for his many innovations during his 30 years as news director. After the sale of the station was announced 2 years earlier, and after considerable instruction, on July 6 of 2000, the CRTC approved application by Chorus Entertainment Incorporated to acquire all of the issued and outstanding shares of WIC Premium Corporation, then owner of both CKNW and sister station CFMI. As a feature of 60 years on air, CKNW aired the Jack Benny program at 12:05 a.m. on April the 23rd of 2004. The show originally ran live from Vancouver on the same day in 1944. On May 14th of 2004, the BC Association of Broadcasters named mid-morning talk show host Bill Good as Broadcaster of the Year for 2003. In 2007, CKNW made a little news of its own. In a decision made March the 26th, but released on July the 19th, the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council ruled that CKNW violated the Radio Television News Directors Association Code of Journalistic Ethics by simulcasting a feed from sister station CINW in Montreal that revealed the location of the students barricaded in Dawson College during a gunman's rampage on September the 13th of 2006. In the incident, 1 student was killed and 19 others were injured. A listener complained to the CRTC, which forwarded the complaint to the CBSC. The Canadian Broadcast Standards Council noted that it was possible that the gunman might have been in contact with an accomplice anywhere in the world. The station was required to read the decision twice on air. Station manager J.J. Johnson was quoted as saying, "It was a complicated decision that we really don't necessarily agree with, but will accept it." While CKNW was sanctioned, the CBSC did not apply the same ruling to CINW, since no complaint was received about that station. So there you have it, more than 6 years in the life of one of Vancouver's most listened to stations, and what a history it was, and no doubt will continue well into the next decade and beyond. In the next edition, we'll take a look at some stations on the FM side of the dial, and there have been some interesting ones. We'll begin with CKNW's sister station, CFMI FM.
Our City on the Air is a feature of this station. Tune in next week for more interesting stories about Vancouver's radio history. Welcome to the Creative Room, a place where creativity lives. Open that door and step inside the Creative Room.
Alone in this room, I can still recall a scene from some years ago.
It's the scene of Vancouver on a rainy night. I can still smell the aroma of greasy fries and hamburgers floating from a nearby eatery. It was a Saturday night, and I recall standing on Granville Mall between Robson Street and Smythe. The traffic rushes east and west, and there are a few yellow cabs going along the mall. There's a lot of loud rock music blasting down to the street on the second floor of the Commodore Ballroom. It was either Trooper or Foster Child, because the local radio station had a van parked outside near the entrance. They were doing a live broadcast of the concert. Throngs of young people were lined up, dressed in a mixture of silver pants and torn jeans. Together, it looked as though they were heading to a Halloween party. This was a rock concert, and the only people I thought would be dressed in silver pants were the performers. But I guess the kids going to the show felt they had to be one of the crowd. I recall watching them shuffle their way into the building and thought there might not be enough room for all those people, but the Commodore was well known for being jam-packed, especially when a name band came to town. I looked down and watched the pellets of rain trickle onto the dark street. Reflections of light smeared into the puddles. I felt perfectly at home there, where no one pointed fingers or made fun of me as I stood near the bus stop. I was younger and a little wilder then. And standing there, watching the people mill about the mall was what I did when I had little or nothing better to do with my time. Now, whenever I think of Vancouver, and in some small corner of my memory, I can still smell that greasy food in the eatery across the street.
And it makes me long for those simpler teenage days.
This is the Creative Room on C-Mix Radio.
Not long ago, the evening news ran a story about cars of the future. There were cars with everything you would expect to find in a luxury limo. There were cars that could dial your phone number for you, and there were cars that could even navigate for you. Yes, I know. It's not supposed to happen until after the world as we know it is demolished by some third world nutcase. But if car shows are showing these things off already, these new machines might not be too far down the road. These new models will have features that will put everything that was built before the computer age to shame. Car manufacturers and sellers must be wondering just how they will keep up with the competition. A few years ago, there was an entertaining show on TV called Knight Rider, in which a computerized sports car did most of the driving and much of the talking. When the show's star, a private detective named Mark, or was it Dave, was in trouble with the bad guys, the car, yes the car, called the police. Nice car, huh? Once only thought of as pure sci-fi, these new cars would have many features. Features like devices that could read blind spots, heat sensors that would let the driver know when another car was getting too close, and special detectors that would read out loud an oncoming sign. If you decided to go out for a few drinks, the car would do one of two things. It would either refuse to start up if you were too drunk to drive, or it would simply drive off and leave you standing there in the middle of the road. Nice car, huh? This car would surely make the roads a lot safer by making it impossible to get too close to the vehicle in front of you. And if you lost control, it would correct itself. Just think. There would be fewer, if any, accidents on the roads because of human error. Any accidents that did happen would be the result of mechanical failure. No more stolen cars, because the built-in voice computer on the dashboard would call the police and identify the thief to the duty officer. Color TV, VCRs, and stereos would be other added features of this shiny new gem of the future. Even if it gets 300 miles to the gallon, it would come with a hefty price, which would mean that the average working stiffs would have to save like the devil to get their hands on this beauty. If computers have come as far as they have over the past decade, it might be feasible to assume that the computerized car might be on the market by the middle of the next century. In the meantime, all the average driver can do is dream.
This is The Creative Room on C-Mix Radio.
Over the years, much has been learned about the value of music in treatment of a variety of physical and mental disorders. Early drummers and musicians played music solely for pleasure. We came to discover that there was therapeutic value for the sick and the mentally troubled. Since those early drummings and playings, man began to use music as a healing tool. No physical wounds didn't close up, but emotional wounds were slowly healed through the thing we call music therapy. Music has long been known to be a source of great pleasure, but over the past century, great strides have been made in the use of music as a therapeutic tool for a wide variety of ailments, from autism to cancer. Clinicians learned that the gentle healing of a drum or playing of a few notes on an instrument had positive impacts on people with illnesses. More recently, music therapy has been used in the treatment of various mental illnesses, from bipolar and unipolar depression to schizophrenia. Scientists have discovered that those who underwent music therapy developed improved outlooks on life and performed more effectively. Those with anger management problems used music therapy to express their anger in a non-threatening environment and became less aggressive because they had a tool, usually a drum, to vent some of their angry feelings. Music as medicine? You bet. More and more people are using this form of treatment when dealing with a life crisis, like the loss of a loved one. Music therapy is also used in schools, hospitals, senior homes, and even in some prisons. If only we can make greater use of music as treatment, we might be able to bring some of our skyrocketing healthcare costs down. That would surely make people sing all the way to the bank, wouldn't it?
The Creative Room is a C-Mix media production.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the room there for another week. That one is getting kind of old, like these are some old ones we dated. It's good to have them around when shorter material. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed the program this week. Back next week with another edition of the C-Mix Radio Magazine, and we'll have some more interesting segments for you. That's what's it. So C-Mix and I'm out of here. Talk to you next week.
Our email address is cmixradioprograms@gmail.com. The address again is cmixradioprograms@gmail.com. Our web address is cmixradio.blogspot.ca. The address again is cmixradio.blogspot.ca. Join us next week for another edition of the C-Mix Radio Magazine. This program is a C-Mix media production.
C-Mix Radio, the home of yesterday's music.